It's a thrill to be back at Fenwick with all you guys. I was sitting out there from 1955 to 1959. And now I'm on the other side here. So we're going to talk about Vietnam. I understand you guys have gotten some briefings from your teachers. And we'll start out with a Xin Chào. So you know some Vietnamese. Xin Chào is what all the people, basically the children, say to visitors. So that's their way to say hello. Who submitted the question about how different the world is after you've been? Okay. What's your name?
Ben.
Pat?
Ben.
Ben. Okay. Okay, good. So that was a wonderful question because actually the last segment of my talk is entitled Back to the World. And my first book, Fire Mission, the subtitle is The World of Nam. So the thing that was totally different was Vietnam. So coming back here was wonderful, but going to Vietnam was quite a surprise, which we will talk about. As you can see from these guys. Can you see those guys okay? Okay. So that's actually in Angkor Wat, Cambodia, about 5 years ago. So I call it the world of Nam. Going way back in history, in 207 BC, the people of China, who basically dominated Vietnam forever, they have, called it Nam Viet, was the first written words about the name of the area down there south of China. And Kublai Khan invaded 3 times between 1257 and 1287. And Kublai Khan is Genghis Khan's grandson. So China and Vietnam have been tangling for a long time. Angkor Wat was built from about 800 to 11 or 1200 in Cambodia, and it's a fantastic, it's one of the wonders of the world, and it's like the biggest collection of temples and sanctuaries, and somewhere in the 14 or 1500s it just got all covered up by the jungle, and the European explorers found it, like in the 1800s. So the first European explorers to Vietnam were the Portuguese. Let me see if I can get this to move here. So that's some more of Angkor Wat. You gotta test this out. Okay, perfect. So the elephants were there in the old days, and these ancient sanctuaries and temples were there. And these 2 guys from Burr Ridge are new, so new to the area. This is the Gulf of Tonkin. Have you guys heard of Tonkin in your class? Okay. So, which is also one of the names for the country once upon a time. So when you're on the tour in Ha Long Bay, and you're in the boat going around, and you see these 2 rocks way out there, and it's the rooster and the hen, and when you're bobbing in the water, they're literally kissing. They call them the kissing rocks, and they've been around for eons. There's like 3,000 karsts, they call them, sticking up all through that area, and that's where the war started. The Vietnam War started in the Gulf of Tonkin. And on my tour, they took us into a cave that was supposedly 1 million years old. So you got to believe what they're telling you. So that's long ago. Okay, great. So here's a nice map for you for Southeast Asia. So you got China definitely overhanging Southeast Asia here. So you can see Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. So the Angkor Wat area is like right there near the A in Cambodia. You can see Hanoi, Haiphong. Da Nang is also known as Tehran. Did you cover that or use that? Okay, so you'll see that name on my other maps. So the Portuguese went to Tehran in the 1500s, then 1600s the Spanish and the French sailed into Tehran, which is Da Nang. And then, let's see here. Some more orientation. Here's Japan up here. Okinawa, did you guys learn about Okinawa? Okinawa is a strategic, it's a strategic military site for the United States, and it was a big factor in World War II for attacking Japan. And the Ryukyu Islands, right here, Okinawa, was one of the places, it was the first place we stopped on our trip to Vietnam. So when I went, these guys, we got the sailors from the old days, and I went from Long Beach, California in August of 1965 with a Marine Battalion landing team, and we traveled to Japan to start with, stayed in Okinawa for about 2 months, then took a ship down, here's Taiwan, and Hong Kong, Hanoi, and we went down to Da Nang. And you'll see what a beautiful harbor and seaport, or seaport that Da Nang is. It's phenomenal. In Saigon, the capital is down here, and it's called Ho Chi Minh City now. See, the Philippines are straight across there. All right. So this is 1,500 miles of seacoast, and that's what the explorers and these other countries wanted. So they had missionaries and explorers and traders, people that were going to set up trade. Rice, rubber, and opium were the treasures that were sought. The first American episode in Vietnam, what year was that? Anybody have a guess? Okay, so the first American episode was 1845. And the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, believe it or not, was on a world tour looking for raw materials and stuff. According to my research, they were looking for coal. So when they stopped into, how do I go back? Here we go. Saigon. Oh, here's this thing. So Ho Chi Minh City, there was a message that a bishop needed help from the Marines. So believe it or not, it was the Navy and the Marines were there, and so the bishop was in Da Nang, in Tehran. So they went up to Vietnam, or up to Da Nang, and checked it out, and nobody cooperated in the city or in the government, because they didn't like this bishop. And he was up in Hue, which is right here, which is where the emperors lived, in Hue, about 60 miles away. So the Americans were thinking about starting a fight and sending the Marines in, and they said, you know what, we're just going to leave. We're trying to help this guy, but the local authorities do not like him, so we're out of here. Okay, so the French, so we were there in 1845. The French came back in the mid-1850s and actually invaded Da Nang and bombarded it and got aggressive and took over part of Vietnam. Okay. Did that wrong? Okay. So that's Hue, that's one of the emperors, one of the last emperors. Very ornate. It's called the Forbidden City. The Citadel is the name of the big complex. And this was a key spot in the Tet Offensive in 1968 when the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong came in and surprised everybody, and it was a huge political victory. They won the fight to start with, but they ended up, because they always used to hide and never really confront us directly, they ended up all getting killed in the next 4 or 5 years, basically. This is a, in the theater area, the king would sit up here, the emperor. So my friend Hayward and I were lucky, and I was back there in March of 2018, and we got to see this performance. Another thing that's ancient over there is the water puppet show, and it's a great tourist attraction, and this has been around for 1,000 years, they said, literally 1,000 years. And these are the people with the music, and there's the water puppets. So they just depict life, from a long time ago out in the countryside, basically. Yeah. We lost Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris just recently, about a month ago. This is Notre Dame Cathedral in Saigon. And the French built this, and apparently it looks a lot like the cathedral in Paris. All the material was from France, and they completed this in 1880. And I've been to Mass there once, and the place is packed. They had 3 priests on the altar. They got and the Mass is in English, and they got the monitors, the TV monitors, so the people can see the words, and it's a very important place. And right across the road there is the post office, the central post office, and Gustav Eiffel designed that post office, so that's a big tourist attraction. So we know who Eiffel is, right? All right, this is Holcomb Lake in Hanoi, and it's a nice tourist spot. So I was supposed to talk a little bit about the Japanese in Vietnam, World War II. So they came in around 1940, and they claimed they were, taking over Vietnam because of China, being in a fight with China. And millions of people in Vietnam ended up starving over the next few years. And Ho Chi Minh started cooperating with the Americans and the Allies, basically. One of the ways he did it is something called the DEER team. And I found this information in a book called Why Vietnam? And the author's name is Archimedes Patty, and it's from the University of California, Berkeley Press, okay? And it's out of print, and I had to do a lot. I forget how I got this, but I used this to write my first book. It's one of my references for my first book, and it's very interesting. And this guy was in what's called the OSS, which was the forerunner of the CIA. So the CIA, and he couldn't write the book. This came out in 1980. He couldn't write the book until they let him, basically, because he was going to be telling some secrets and telling a lot of stuff. So this is a great book. I forget how I got it, but it's a great reference. So in that book, the DEER team was established to help the American pilots getting shot down in Vietnam. So, and it was a 50-man team parachuted in, and they were Viet Minh, M-I-N-H, Viet Minh, who are the forerunners, and they became the Viet Cong. You guys all know who the Viet Cong are, right? Because that's important for the whole story here. The Viet Cong are called the VC also, so we call them, I might refer to them as Viet Cong or VC, probably VC more than anything. So this 50-man team would go in and help rescue pilots and also harass and attack Japanese positions out in the countryside northwest of Hanoi, actually. There's Uncle Ho when he was a youngster. So Ho Chi Minh's very famous, and give you a little history on him. At the age of 21 in 1911, he worked on a ship that sailed to London. And he's a co-founder of the Communist Party in France. And he also worked with the son-in-law of Karl Marx. So the guy was definitely a communist, but he would work with anybody to help the Vietnamese, which was good, which is politics. So later he even became a friend of Mao Zedong. But he also had believe it or not, a copy of the Declaration of Independence in his office. So President Roosevelt was in favor of independence for Southeast Asia there, because those were French and British colonies, basically, at the end of the war. However, because Russia was the main threat and communism was the main threat, and Southeast Asia was like, so, who knows where that even is, in 1940 something. So the British said, there's no way we're going to give up our colonies. So the politics prevailed, and Ho Chi Minh didn't, unfortunately for him, didn't get any independence. So what he did, when you're really famous and really made it to the top, you get your face on all the money. So Alexander Hamilton. Yeah, it's a good idea to do that. All right, so where are we here? All right, so he didn't get his way, he didn't get independence. So what he did is he actually declared war on the French after everything was settled on World War II. And in September of 1945, he started the first Indochina War. And basically we were in the second Indochina War, which nobody called it that, and he did everything he could to get the French out of there. Dien Bien Phu. Does anybody know what Dien Bien Phu is, the battle? So Dien Bien Phu was the key battle in 1954. It's northwest of Hanoi, and it's like for 54 days there was a siege, and they surrounded this place and humiliated the French, made them surrender, and that was the beginning of the end for the French in Vietnam. So 1954, 1955. Then they had the Geneva Convention, which I would assume you guys have heard of the Geneva Convention. And what they did is they split Vietnam at the 17th parallel. So that's how we came up with the North and South Vietnam. And one interesting fact that you guys probably don't know is one of the agreements in the Geneva Convention and when they split Vietnam is the people could choose where they wanted to move. So you could go from north to south or south to north. So 1 million Catholics moved from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, because South Vietnam was much more progressive, and we got the Notre Dame Cathedral down there, and it was a lot different than the North. The North was really hardcore. The South was trying to be, was more like the French, actually. So the U.S. never signed the treaty, by the way. So where you were going to split the country, and then there was going to be an election in 2 years, and the U.S. did not sign the treaty because we knew Ho Chi Minh was going to win the election, and he's a communist, and we didn't want him running that area. So the CEDAW Treaty came up. Does anybody know what CEDAW stands for? Okay, CEDAW's big treaty. It was in 1954, Southeast Asia Trade Organization, or Treaty Organization. So the countries got together in Southeast Asia and formed this pact to defend each other and work with each other. But Eisenhower, I know you guys all know about this, in 1959 was worried about the great flanking movement by the communists in Vietnam. And if we lost Vietnam, it would everything would start crumbling, and it would be the domino effect. The dominoes would start falling, and communism would spread all over the region. I worked hard to get that picture. You got to do it at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. But it's easy to get up because you're upside down. It's 12, 13-hour trip. So the first few days you're in Vietnam, you're up at 5. So as I told you, and so in 1959, we got Eisenhower worrying about the domino effect, and we got my class getting ready to graduate from Fenwick in 1959. So, all right. So I told you about my ship sailed from Long Beach, California to Okinawa, and then down to Tehran Bay. Before you hit the beach or land in the Marines, you get a briefing. And the advance party, they have what they call an advance party, and they go in and they check everything out and come back and give you a briefing. And it was an officer talking to us, and this guy was really excited. It's like, I'll never forget, he came on board and he said, "You are about to tumble down the rabbit hole. This place is amazing. There's lush vegetation, it's a primitive setting, there's mountains covered with trees, flowers. The people live in these little tiny thatch roof huts with wooden floor or with dirt floors. There's water buffalo walking all over the place, kerosene lamps, no electricity out in the countryside. It's like a different world." And it was. So that's my friend Hayward Paul. He hadn't been back to Vietnam. I've been back 5 times, as Kim told you, starting in 2007. So Hayward and I went back last year in March. So that's us at 1966, 2 first lieutenants at the artillery battery. So I graduated from Annapolis, 1964, and went to Quantico, Virginia. It's the first place you go when you're a young officer in the Marines, first time. So I went from college to the basic school, it's called. So I'm going to school again. I'm in Quantico, Virginia, which is also where they train the FBI agents, but it's a Marine Corps base. And I was there I think basic school is about 6 months, and then you choose your MOS, they call it, Military Occupational Specialty. And I chose artillery, so I got to go to school again. so I went to college, went to the basic school, now I got to go to artillery school. And the point being, continuing education is a good thing, and even the military forces you to do it and wants you to do it because they want you to be able to do your job. And the schooling I got was really invaluable because even though there wasn't supposed to be a war, there was a war. And I got to throw a few passes and run the ball. You get to actually play the game, and I got to get some water. The schooling helps. Ooh.
Captain Gorman, quick question. Which one are you?
I'm this one.
Okay.
The guy with the good tan. So Hayward ended up working for Ross Perot right in the beginning. Talk about lucky. So there were a few officers that got to learn how to do stuff with something they called a computer, which we didn't really know what that was. They're kind of a new thing. So he's one of the guys who got to do that. So he worked for Ross Perot for his career, and he did a lot of teaching. So he got to retire early, and he became a missionary, a Christian missionary, and he's one hell of a great guy. So there's the map. Okay, this is an important map for you. So you see Tehran right there. So Da Nang, Tehran. This is Monkey Mountain. The Marines named it Monkey Mountain for obvious reasons. This is the bay where the ships came in, the Portuguese and the French and the Spanish and the Americans, Da Nang Bay. This is China Beach. Have you guys heard of China Beach? There was a TV show even called China Beach. No? Okay, man, okay.
I remember it.
Yeah, okay. So this is China Beach. Marble Mountain, you're gonna see a really cool cave in Marble Mountain. Here's the air base, the airfield, the air base. So that was our mission, was to guard the air base, or as part of a group, you know, to keep the bad guys, the Viet Cong, away from the air base, so we could go out and bomb people. I gotta see. So the fort, we're gonna talk about the forts here. The artillery battery was here that I was with. This is Bana Mountain. You're gonna get to see some, you know, that. This is the Horseshoe. This is where I got wounded, down here. And just the main part of Da Nang. When I go to Da Nang, I stay at the Fiorama Resort, which is right near Marble Mountain. You know, it's right on China Beach. And when, I think it was last year, they had one of these, a big, like a G8 meeting with Putin and Trump and the guy from China. So they all met, and they were literally next door to where I stay. So, and the Fiorama manages that building. And it was different timing, but I also was in Hanoi recently, and it's my souvenir from the Metropole, and that's where the meeting with Chairman Kim and President Trump took place, the guy from North Korea, at the hotel I stayed at, which is a classic. If you ever go to Europe, basically, and Vietnam, stay at a Metropole, because they are totally classic places. And I read a book 6 months ago. It's a great book. It's called, I forget the name of it now. A Gentleman from Moscow. A Gentleman from Moscow. Great book. Might be a little bit too early for you guys, and it shows you how, he was an aristocrat from Russia, etc., and he became nothing. How you can just be nothing with the communists, the socialists, and he was confined to the Metropole Hotel, and that's where he lived his life. So it's a great book, and it took me 3 weeks to get it from the library, so, on the waiting list. All right. Oh, so when I was in artillery school, another good little story is at lunchtime, so here we are, we're the rough, tough Marines, right? At lunchtime, we played bridge. And it was the guys from Harvard and the guys from Annapolis primarily. And there were only about 15 of us in the class. They keep the classes small because they want you to know what you're doing. The things they carried, in the book you guys are reading. So one of the things I carried, I bought myself a small camera, and I didn't know if I could use it or not when I was in Okinawa. And that's the first picture I took in Vietnam. I mean, talk about historical. That boat could have, the same look 200 or 300 years ago, before 1965. So that's a junk, and that came out to see, who are these guys? What's this, there were like five ships we came in, so. This is a classic, I love that one. So we were out on an operation. The things they carried, she's got to be carrying at least 100 pounds of rice there, for sure. And she did not acknowledge our existence. It's like she was in one plane and we were in another plane, and we didn't bother her. There were like 100 Marines there, and we're all, guys with their rifles, and we just let her go by, but she didn't look at us. It was like, we don't exist and she doesn't exist. She wanted, it was interesting. It was really interesting. All right. Oh, another thing. That's right. Got to tell you. So I went to Camp Pendleton after the artillery school. And Camp Pendleton is in, where's Camp Pendleton? California, okay, south of LA. Oh, man. Okay. And it's a fabulous place, It's a big piece of federal property. It's worth billions of dollars now. That's for sure. Okay. So after I finally got to go to Camp Pendleton and be a Marine for a while and be with an artillery battery, I got orders to go to the Army Artillery College, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I got to go back to Oklahoma and attend that school. But that's when I got my orders shortly after that to go to Vietnam. So that's my first home in Da Nang in Vietnam was the North Fort, and the French. Yes, go ahead.
I just had a quick question.
Could talk a little loud because my hearing's not great.
I just had a quick question about your schooling. Was there only like certain people who had to go to these many schools, or was every soldier like supposed to go against?
Okay, I was in the Marines first of all, so there's a big difference between the soldiers and the Marines. And I was an officer, so no, it was just, the basic school everybody goes to that's a young officer when you graduate from South Carolina or Navy or wherever you went, we're in the ROTCs or Notre Dame. But the artillery college, then you pick. So some of these guys go to the combat or the infantry training. There's supply corps. There's aviation. A lot of people go to flight school. Okay, but in the Marines, everybody has to go to the basic school and learn how to basically be a Marine, and then you can go to flight school, whatever. So it's not everybody gets to go. No. Although the Marines themselves get schooling too. So guys that I got through with high school, I don't want to go to college. They end up in class a lot anyhow. But at the base, like at Camp Pendleton, and they have the sergeants are teaching them this and teaching them that. So anyhow, this is a fort that was definitely there during World War II. And interesting, and it was kerosene lamps, no electricity. That was the view from the fort looking west, and that goes all the way out to that Bana Mountain I was telling you about. And that shows you how beautiful and primitive. Those are rice paddies where you can see the water reflecting, the rice paddies. This is one of the stars of the show, Juan. So I befriended Juan and Tuk. So Juan was a little kid in the village, in one of the hamlets, and she's lived in the Buddhist hamlet, and Tuk was Catholic. So this little girl got really scared when we gave them the rules via an interpreter, and basically it was anybody who's out at night, it was a night war, if you're out at night, we're gonna kill you. It was, and she got, her eyes were like, and she caught me, we met our eye, and what we did is we had ambushes went out every night. 2/3 of the Marines went on ambush, and something called H&I, harassment and interdiction fire by the artillery, would go every night. And it would just be random firing, not at your village, but in the woods, in the jungle, in the areas, on the roads. And I was in charge of that near the end of my tour. So she and and she's carrying a box I got for Christmas. So this is around Christmas time. She's got no shoes on. None of the women wore shoes. There weren't many men around. They were either in the Viet Cong or the South Vietnamese Army. The ARVN, we called it, the Army of South Vietnam. You can see the kids back here with the conical hats. They got the black pajamas on. So that's how everybody dressed. My other friend, Tuk, ran the store, okay? She was in charge of the store. She sold Coca-Cola, which was like my connection to Chicago. It was like being home. It was unbelievable. The guy I relieved up in the fort brought me down to the store. And so Tuk got to wear shoes, and I'm sure, because she was selling clothes and selling stuff, she probably picked up a pair of shoes. This was the fancy means of transportation for most people. A bike, or you could walk. Another little kid with the black pajamas, no shoes. So I spent time with both of them in here, and I always had a bodyguard with me. You never did anything alone, and I always had one of the guys who worked for me come with me and stand behind me with his rifle. That's Foom. She and I have been friends since 2010. She was one of the translators for the medical mission team, which we'll talk about later. That's the Catholic Church a half a mile south of the fort, and that was my landmark for finding my friends, which is part of the story here. When I found that, I knew I made it, but it took several days to find it. So Phum went to the university in Da Nang, and her mother was in the army, so I don't think she's communist, but she's on the inside track over there. And not everybody is a communist. The Communist Party doesn't want everybody in their group. They select certain people. Oh, wait, I get it. Okay. That's Sister Amy. So the Marines spent a lot of time with the children. We helped the children. We had a platoon. So there's 3 platoons in a company. So one platoon was at the fort. This platoon was at the orphanage up on a hill. Then there was one further south. So Amy was Vietnamese, obviously, but I took 2 years of French here, in addition to 2 years of Latin. You guys still take Latin? Okay. And I took 2 years of French in Vietnam, or in Annapolis. So I could communicate with her in French, which was really cool, which I never thought my French lessons would work or be a factor when I was carrying a rifle. And I used to go to Mass and carry a rifle in church and go up to and get communion with a rifle over my shoulder. This girl with the X, another nun you're going to meet later on, Sister Catherine, when she saw that picture, she said, I will show you her. And this is like in 2010 or 12. So I actually saw that kid. So she stayed with the nuns her whole life, basically, because she is retarded, apparently. But the Marines were really good to the kids, and we shared food with them, and we gave them whatever we could. We were really good to them. Okay, now a few war stories. So this is the artillery battery, and you guys saw where it was. It's about a mile toward Da Nang from the fort. So after the attack, which I'll tell you about, Hayward and I, my friend and I, went up on the hill. It's like, we got to look at this and see, check it out. So there's 6 cannons, and they're covered up here. And you're going to see some pictures of them in a minute. But there's 6 cannons strewn about. There's about 110 Marines. These are the tents the Marines lived in. We had wooden floors, screening, obviously, the canvas tops. We lived better than the local people. It wasn't great, but it was better than they did. So we were attacked at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that's what our cannons looked like. We had 6 105 howitzers, they're called. There's 3 guys, working on it, doing the numbers, and then a couple of guys that load the shells, take turns loading the shells. So we got hit by a Viet Cong sapper team, and they blew up 2 of the cannons with satchel charges, which are explosives in a bag that they flip over, and they were well trained. They did their homework, okay? Because a month later, they investigate all these attacks. A month later, they found our battery position up in the mountains, like a replica. So they did their homework. One of the mistakes they made is they were on drugs. So they're on drugs, but they did their homework. And most of them got killed, but 5 Marines got killed too, which was bad. They had these beautiful assault rifles called Kalashnikovs. Have you ever heard of them? They're from Russia, the Russian. And so they're AK-47s. So we recovered 7 of them. I wish I had one. They'd be worth a lot of money just to have as a souvenir. Here's a rocket launcher. So the things they carried, right? The bad guys carried stuff too, the Viet Cong. They didn't wear any clothes. They had a pair of gym shorts on, no shirts, no shoes, no hats, no nothing. Wire cutters, Chi-Com grenades. That's our ammo box. and magazines with rounds and all kinds of web gear, and that's where I was during the attack in the exec pit. We had thousands of sandbags around all of our guns, all of our positions when we were there. So that's one of my favorite pictures. That is totally cool. These are the revolutionaries' weapons, like from way before us and even after us. All right, the Marines fought the good fight. So that's early in the morning. So this attack was at 2 o'clock in the morning. So this guy, this is Hakey, Lou Hakey, and I got his comment on, his little quote on the back of the back cover of The Elephant Smiled. He's a big, tough dude. We had some really tough guys. This guy Reynolds was from like Kentucky or something, and he was, when he was a kid, although they're kids now, they're probably 19 or 20. He was great with a gun and with a rifle, and he was, when I came out of the exec pit, and I was going along slowly, I tripped and fell. I tripped on a body. And I had my pistol and I put it in the guy's face, but Reynolds had shot him. And if that guy got into the exec pit, because at the time this happened, we were like changing the watch schedule, so I had to watch from midnight to 3 in the morning. So at 2 or 2:15, the guy that's working the radio with you leaves and goes out and wakes people up. But if he got in there and threw a grenade or just started shooting, he couldn't miss. I would have got nailed. This is the guy you'll see later on Kobayashi at one of the reunions, and you'll see Hakey at the reunion. So these guys did a hell of a job. All right. Okay. So the attack was in April. So I lived a pretty good life. I lived a great life when I was at the fort for 3 months. Then I moved back to the battery. I was an executive officer. Then we had the attack. Then I got a new job as the battalion liaison officer. I got promoted, guys moving along. So now I'm on the staff of the battalion commander for the infantry. So bigger deal. So the first major battle was called Operation Hastings. So you guys have heard of the Battle of Hastings, right? 1066, the Normans and the English. So I don't know why, but they named this thing Operation Hastings. And it was in July. And I was up there on the DMZ. Remember I told you about the DMZ from the Geneva Convention? In the Song Ben Hai, song is the word for river, my favorite word in Vietnamese, song. Song Ben Hai divided the North and the South. So the North Vietnamese army was coming over through and around the river. So we went up there to stop them, the Marines. Battalion landing team. So when I got up there, we actually, So we actually flew up there too, my group. Oh, we were there, I was there 16 nights. And that was like going to a war movie. That was like the real thing. That was different than living in Da Nang and living in the fort and having a night war. And most of the time, nothing happened. I could walk to church on Sunday. You could live a pretty normal life, except at night. Everybody was up at night. So we get up to Quan Tri, it's called. It's up near the border. And I'm there a few hours. Obviously, I have no clue where I am. And sergeant comes over and says, "Are you Lieutenant Gorman?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "They want to see you at the operations tent." I'm like, "Okay, where is it? You got to go to this meeting." He said, "It's like 3 miles away." I'm like, I don't even know where I am. And they said, the guy points and he says, "That's for you." They sent a helicopter to get me, which is pretty cool. So myself and another first lieutenant got on the helicopter and they flew us to the meeting. And we're preparing for, Hastings is already going on, but we're like the next batch of guys that came in. So I go to this meeting and it's like, who are you? Okay, stand over there for a while. So, okay, Gorman, come here. So I go up there and this guy's got maps. And he's handing me the maps, but I know he's not a Marine. He's a guy about 40 years old. He doesn't have a uniform on. He's got, some kind of dungaree stuff on. He's with the CIA. He's given us maps. And it's guard this with your life, blah, blah, blah. And we got briefed. So I called in a lot of fire missions when I was in those 16 days. That was interesting. So we did one of those helicopter insertions, and it wasn't quite like the movie Apocalypse Now, but it was close. I don't know if you guys saw that. Apocalypse Now is a pretty rough movie, but it depicts a lot of the stuff that we did. It's like a composite of events and things. It's definitely interesting. All right.
Did you want to take a break at this point, or did you?
No, I'm actually doing good. I'm doing fine. Okay, on Operation Hastings and any operation I was on, I had a radio man or two radio men, and they carried, the things they carried, a 26-pound battery on their back and a handset so I could communicate. So I'm saying, and I think I'm somewhat close, that was like the first cell phones, but they weighed 26 pounds and you needed somebody to carry them. So that got shrunk. By the time I left, they were smaller, and 20 years later or 30 years later, I think that's how the cell phone started. Okay, speaking of homework, one of the nights we were out in the jungle, we were warned and told where we're going to be going, the Viet Cong have, they pop up out of tunnels, so you don't know what's going to, where they are or anything, at night, obviously. So when we got to our position, after a rough day, the word was you got to dig a foxhole, and they have what were called entrenching tools. So I had my radio men dig the foxhole, and I said, I'm not going to do this. I want you to dig a foxhole for me too. I'm going to do my homework. And I sat down, I got the maps out, and I figured out exactly where we were. And of course, there's no GPS, so you got to figure it out yourself. That night, I took the first watch. I said, you guys sleep, and I'll do the first watch. So just before midnight, it got really eerie and really quiet, and you could feel the sweat trickling down your back. And I heard some friction, some metal on metal. And I'm like, and you're thinking faster than I'm talking here, but it was rounds sliding down a mortar tube. And so we were going to get mortared. And it was so close, I could actually hear the rounds going down. So I screamed and yelled, mortars, mortars, and like 15 seconds later, boom, 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 they were coming all over the place. So I hopped in the hole, got a flashlight, grabbed my map, and called in a fire mission. Because I knew, I heard where they were, I had my map all set, I knew where I was, and it could be disapproved if it was dangerous, and it was dangerous for sure. But I took a guess at where they were, called in a fire mission, and 3 or 4 or 5 minutes later, the rounds landed, and we found out 3 or 4 days later, when we captured some people, that mortar team did get hit by the mortars, or by the artillery mission. So,
Can you just, when you say you called in?
on this radio I'm talking about, yeah. So these guys have the 26-pound battery, and there's a handset, and it was like 4, 5, 6 miles you could, yeah. So you call back to a liaison, and then they, communicate. And I could even talk to airplanes sometimes too. Another good story, have you guys ever heard of Peter, Paul, and Mary? Yeah, okay, good, cool, all right. All right, and you guys for sure probably did, right? Okay, that's cool. So on a different night up at Hastings, we're through moving and we're kind of dug in and we're on a mountaintop looking out and there's like a nice valley out here. So all of a sudden, poof, 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 these flares start falling through the sky. And it's like, whoa, and I said, I wonder what's going on here. And then before the guy could answer me, I heard a growling. It's like, holy crap, what is this, And they said, that's Puff the Magic Dragon. From the Peter, Paul, and Mary's song. The Marines came up with all kinds of clever stuff. And that's why we have a Monkey Mountain, by the way. So they said, that's Puff. And I'm like, Puff? Come on, Puff the Magic Dragon? They said, yeah. So you missed. So Peter, Paul, and Mary, song in 1963. So we're up in the mountains, on this Operation Hastings, and all of a sudden these flares start falling through the sky. And I say to the guy next to me, what's that? What's going on? And before he could answer me, there's a growl, a roar. And then the guy said, finally it quiets down. The guy said, it's Puff the Magic Dragon. And it's true, and the rounds, they're Gatling guns. You guys know what the Gatling guns are from the olden days. So these planes, they got them configured so they're million candle power flares falling out of the planes and the Gatling guns. And they can saturate a football field in like 60 seconds. So you can be hiding, but you're dead. It just saturates the whole place. So we had Peter, Paul, and Mary, Puff the Magic Dragon. All right, one more story. All right, this one's a little rough. One of the mornings we got up, we're moving, and we're still on Hastings, and we come to this river crossing. There's all kinds of beautiful flowers, but we're getting ready to cross, and it's like, wow, does it smell? What is going on here? So we get closer and closer, and the smell gets worse and worse. And when you get to the river, you walk through the river. So you're walking through the river. It smelled like shit, and it was really bad. And we got through the brush and all that, and there's bodies all over the place. And they're North Vietnamese soldiers in uniform, laid out, and they were not, they weren't dragged off. They usually drag off their guys, but these guys were there because they couldn't get enough of them, and there were a lot of them. And the Marines were like really upset. So I actually found myself, since I wasn't in the infantry, I'm a support guy, I'm helping them out, calling in artillery. So I'm like standing around, and I'm like literally ankle deep in body, in a few bodies. So I start looking at these guys, and I'm like, the insects are in their eye sockets. And I ended up saying a prayer for one of these guys, and like for his family. And I thought about how they say, pray for your enemy and all that. It's like, I can't believe I'm doing this, So I'm not, it's just, I did it. I just did that. It was something I always remember. All right, last war story is the horseshoe, which I showed you. So this was in July, so now it's September and we're going home in 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever. So one of the other officers, so I'm in the back and I'm not doing much. I got a lot of free time. So one of the other lieutenants says, I have to teach a class to the infantry on how to call in artillery, but I got to do X, Y, and Z. Will you take my place? And I got nothing to do. I said, sure. So I go out, and I'm living further south than where the fort was and all that. So we go to that horseshoe area, and we're up there, and I got about 15 Marines with me, and I'm starting to teach them a class. And all of a sudden, I'm flying through the air, and a few other guys are flying through the air, and it was a IED, just like going on in Iraq and Syria and all these places. It was an explosive device that, so they have an expression, you don't hear the one that gets you. I didn't hear anything. I knew I was flying through the air. I didn't hear anything, and I hit the ground. 4 or 5 Marines got hurt. We got they medevaced out of there and went to the hospital in Da Nang. But luckily, it wasn't too serious, so it was that.
How long were you out, Ray?
Like 10 days I was in the hospital. So here's a beauty on the things they carried. I love these two guys. So that's an M60 machine gun, which was a really super important weapon. And obviously, and the rounds, and you have a helper. If you got a machine gun, you got a guy feeding the rounds in. And they got their flak jacket on and their helmet, cigarette. We all carried canteens of water. Those aren't the jungle boots we had. We had jungle boots that actually drained and were a lighter weight material. But that's a cool picture, those guys. Okay, next segment. All right. We have the ability to heal ourselves by helping others. So, I got married and had children and had a job and all that stuff, but I got the itch for some reason, like in the 1990s, to go back and try and find these two, just as a challenge. And I had some baggage because I got hurt, right? And I was involved in some of these operations that were scary. But I hated the place when I left. But it was just the mystery of the exotic venue had grabbed me over the years, and I had pictures, I had some maps, I had some background. So here we are again with the map, going back to, this time I got some labels on there for everybody. So what's this? Anybody know? Monkey Mountain. China Beach. Here's the horseshoe where I got hurt. Operation Hastings is way up north, so that's not part of this. There's the air base again. Da Nang Bay, Marble Mountain. The artillery battery is out here. So this is where the attack is, the artillery battery. This is where the fort is. This is where that church was, right about there. Bana Mountains down here. This air base, apparently, I find it hard to believe, was supposedly the busiest airport in the world when the war was really roaring, which I can't imagine more flights from O'Hare or, those kind of places, but that's how many runs we had going on that place, or, from that place, apparently. So I wanted to go back. I didn't know how to do it. And so I did a little research. I can't remember the computer thing. Once we got computers, I used them. But so I did, and every time I checked it out, it's like, it's not ready yet. It's not ready. The place is terrible to visitors. They take your money and they treat you bad, and the food stinks, and so it took a while. And then I retired, and I had always wanted to write a book, but I couldn't. I tried early in my work career. I couldn't do it. It's too hard to write a book unless that's your job. So I started writing Fire Mission, and I stumbled upon this, That's with a Mission group, and read their website and thought, maybe I need support. It's emotional. I need a crutch. I need some help. I know I'm going to have a problem when I go back there. And I want to find my friends. I'm not that interested in the mission, but I'll participate if I have to. So that their motto and their reconciliation, so the vets with a mission, reconciliation is their motto. They want to restore friendly relations. They want to help the people out. They want veterans, they want medical people and veterans, because they want the veterans to lose the anger, to let it go, to find closure. So I needed closure. One of the things they did at the hotel is they have a bird cage, and they have a couple of birds, and they bring us up on the balcony. And it's like they have one of the veterans who's got PTSD, who's got hang-ups, open the bird cage and let the birds go, and you let it go, okay? Let the birds go, and you let it go. So while I was trying to find my friends, I ended up meeting a new friend. And this is a church in Da Nang that the French built, obviously. I got it there. It's pink. It's kind of, and they have an English Mass on Sunday. Kanga Church, the weather vane up there is the rooster, so it's the Rooster Church. That's what the locals called it, the people. So that's Sister Catherine. I met her in 2007, the first year I went back. You can see the kids have scout uniforms on. In those days, they had a high school going there. And you know, the Communist Party has been squeezing them where now they can't teach kids that are 7 years old or older. So they have to go to the public schools. However, the big thing at every school in Vietnam is English. You must learn how to speak English. And all the children speak English. And all the children love to practice on us. If, you know, once they, you know, they're really shy and nervous and all that, but English is the big thing. So that picture of Sister Amy that we saw a long time ago, I don't know if you remember it. When I went to Mass, and she's up there doing the singing and in charge of the, you know, helping the people out. It's the English Mass. I showed her that picture. She freaked out. She jumped out of her sandals. She's screaming. Sister Amy was her mentor. It was like, unbelievable. There, look at that picture. That is, talk about history. So that's Sister Catherine, the X. That's before I was there, 1963. So she is a postulate, and it's out in the same area. It's out where that Conga, not the Conga church, the one out in the countryside where Amy is, Sister Amy is. And all these kids are left behind by the French. So the French were gone in 54, 55, whatever. So these kids are all orphans, and some are Vietnamese orphans straight up because their parents, I'm sure, got killed in the war. But it's a definite connection between the French and now the Americans coming in.
There are a lot of biracial kids there too?
What?
A lot of biracial kids there?
I can't hear you.
Biracial? Were there a lot of...
Yeah, they were biracial, and they were totally discriminated against. The Vietnamese society would not accept the kids that were French or whatever, you know, anything. If they weren't straight Vietnamese, they definitely had problems. And that's why these nuns are saints. They did a hell of a job. So this was on the back. She found this picture. Read that. She found that picture and sent it to me, you know, here in Clarendon Hills. So a year later, she found it. You know, I met her in 07. Okay, I'm going to get a glass of water. So she and I have been friends ever since 07. Everybody through with that? So when you go visit her, she brings you in, lets you be the English teacher, and you have, she's got a big board with, you know, grapefruits or pineapples and mangoes, and so the kids get to practice their English with the visitors. And they sing songs, and they're happy. They're good kids. A lot of these kids are, as time went on here, are dropped off by the parents that are going to work. The mom brings them, mom goes to work, and they watch them. Or, and they train them, and they obviously work in some religious training. After I met her and we became friends, anytime I'm there and I go to Mass on Sunday, I get to do the first reading, which is really cool, at the English Mass. And in Da Nang, I'd say it's about a 75%, the church is about 75% full. It's a nice sized church. That's one of my daughters, three of my grandsons, and my son-in-law took the picture. So you can see she's holding a bag. So in these communist countries, everything is oblique. You can't be direct. So she asked me to bring a computer in. So I got a computer from a doctor in Georgia, sent it to my house in Clarendon Hills. So I bring it, and so you go up and you say, "Hello, sister, how you doing?" And we're talking like this, and I'm handing her the bag, okay? Because there's minders. There's people who watch guys like me, and guys like people like my daughter, maybe not the boys. But, so there's minders in the communist countries, and everything is slippery, okay? This is really a cool story. There's a Vietnamese store in Westmont, not far from where I lived in Clarendon Hills, and they asked me to bring some cell phones in one year. So I brought them in, and it was the year I went with them. And you get in about 11 o'clock at night, go to the hotel. So in the morning, the first morning, we're down in the lobby waiting to get picked up by our tour guide. And the deal was, this woman's going to come and, I'm bringing the phones in for some woman that these guys know, older woman. So the woman comes in and goes to the front desk, which I don't know about this, and I forgot about it actually. And somebody comes over and says, where's Mr. Gorman? Here. He said, this woman says, over there at the counter said, you found her phone. And I'm like, I'm thinking, I found her phone. I wonder what this guy, and I'm like, oh, you know what? That's right, it's up in my room. So my daughter's there with the kids, and it's like, okay, I'm leaving, and this woman comes over and starts, not talking to him, sitting with him. I go upstairs, and it's like, yeah, these are the phones I was supposed to bring in. So I go down and I give them to her. So there's no way I found them. I got there at midnight, went to my hotel room, I didn't find anything. But it was clever. She says, she doesn't come in and say, hey, some guy's got some phones for me.
To avoid the minders, you're saying.
To avoid the minders, to avoid anybody, to keep it quiet.
Like, oh, those are mine, thank you for giving
Yeah, or even the guy at the desk, he comes in and says, there's an American here who's got some phones for me. Red light, ding, ding, ding. So, because they don't like anything to be quiet, or So anyhow, the boys loved it. And we were there on Christmas Day. So I went to Mass twice in Vietnam in Christmas, 65, and I got to do the first reading with my grandsons in church. Sister Catherine had me drive by the Shrine of Mary by the sea with one of her former students who was a taxi driver. So that's amazing. They definitely give some space to the Catholics in Vietnam. Fresh flowers every day. Another one of my favorite pictures here in the beginning, early in the morning. So my mission was to find my friends, right? So from 1965. So I found Tuk. Tuk led a rough life. She was a basket case when I found her. What I did is I had her picture, and I had these two really good guides, and I got to use the van and the driver and the number one woman with the mission team in the afternoons and go and look around, look for them, and I gave them the maps, and I told them, and we went to the wrong place many times, and we don't even know if she's alive. The population, the mission guys, the guys who run the mission team said, you will never find them, but we'll give you a shot, you know, we'll never find them. So I found her, and this is her nephew, so the kid, no shirt on. So these people, my guides are out there looking and talking, and finally this kid overhears the conversation, turns around and starts running away from us. So obviously if he runs away, we gotta run after him. So, and yeah.
So if things are so indirect in their culture, for instance, your example about the phone situation.
Yeah.
You know, you can't directly give her the phone. Were you considered, was it considered dangerous for you to be associating with any of these people?
No. You just have to be careful. Careful's the word. And you don't do anything directly or over. I think that's why the Catholic Church is doing fine there, because here's the church, and come on in, we're having Mass. I mean, in Saigon, they literally have traffic cops out there directing traffic for people to get in and get out. This mission team I'm with, they have an ulterior motive. So they not only want to help the people out, they want to teach them about Jesus Christ. And it's, you know, like a Baptist group, and they have, you know, what they call them, house chapels or something. So it's sneaky. And the Vietnamese government, or the communists, you know how the communist cells started out, the communist, you know, the 3-man cells? So they don't want you in your basement with 3 of these kids talking about the gospel or talking about the Bible. They want you in the chapel at St. Vincent Ferrer talking about that. And if they want to sit in there with you, they sit in there with you, right? So, yeah, so it's, so anyhow, Took had a rough life. But I found her and she went crazy. She loved it. So that's her daughter, Tui, who's really nice, and Tuan, grandson. She's got a granddaughter. And that's 5 years later, okay? And she's in a better house in that picture. And she is, that's funny, you know, so I got Tuk and Juan, right, the two. So Tuk always says, Catholic, not Catholic. No little competition, you know. And they all have an altar in their house. So there's a crucifix in her house, and Juan's got the Buddhas and all that. So I brought my family to Tuk's house on Christmas Eve, 2013. Phenomenal. That's the girl that was in front of the church, Phum, who's my guide. That's her mother. That's her daughter and the kid. These are my kids. So I found, so there's Juan. So that's the picture we saw before. So I found her a couple days later. Tuk didn't know where she was, but so on Sunday, so the woman that was kind of my main guide said, on Sunday, all these people get together, you know, out here in the countryside. So we will go and talk to them, like, and see if they know where this person is. So Tuk actually lived like a half a mile from the fort, from where I was. So it's like no real appreciable difference. And that's why people recognized her faster. This other one lives way out on the way to Bana Mountain, when I showed you that one picture going out in the boondocks. She went crazy when she was like, and she went buku long time, and she was totally beside herself. That's her fancy house right there. She was a grandmother when I found her. She cooks with, when I found her, she cooks with sticks on a concrete platform, no refrigeration, and she lives in the tropics. They did have electricity. So we took care of that a few years later. You can't do stuff too fast either. Like, when I finally got her a refrigerator through Phum, she was like afraid of the electric bill, you know, which was going to be $3 a month or something. But how you can live in 100-degree heat, you know, and cook the meals with sticks. And of course, there's an outhouse. There's no plumbing. And that's today. They're still there. And the good thing for her is they have like a family group there. Like her couple of her brothers are there. So it's different. I met a hermit. On one of the trips when I was there with Juan, I take turns, you know, going back and forth, and sometimes we're together. But I said, I want to do something different, something unusual. So her brother, who's always like our guide, one of her older brothers, took us not far from where they are, a few miles away, and we actually met the lady monk. So 2012, she was out there 20 years, so she's been out there longer than that. It's a nice house. She actually has a decent place. She's got the altar, and she prays. On this last trip, she wouldn't see anybody because she was praying hard for world peace. And so I brought the boys for sure. I mean, that's a unique experience to meet the monk. And she's a nice lady. You cannot touch her, especially men. She will not touch a man at all. Like, you know, I would give her some money, but you do 2 hands, and she takes it with 2 hands. You know, no touching. But she was serving some kind of chocolate and tea. We had a tea ceremony. So once again, that's Foom's mother and Foom. Took, that's the brother, that's Will, Liz, Colin, Landon, Michael. There's the cave I was telling you about. So that's Marble Mountain. That's my favorite cave. And the VC used to hide in that cave, and the Marines weren't allowed to go in and get them. So it's a real complicated, there's all kinds of caves there in Marble Mountain. It's a phenomenal tourist place now. It's really cool. And you can see the Buddha up here. Up here, what you can't see is what we finally did, we meaning, you know, years later, I was there in the beginning, is Marine Air blew the top off of a big chunk of this place. And it's up here, and the sun is coming in. So, and there's a plaque on the wall that says, the Americans did it. But this is a great place to visit, you know. I don't know how they got this huge Buddha up there, but they did. So that's the clinic, one of the clinics, 2012. So that's Took's daughter, Twee, that little boy, granddaughter. You can see the mama-sans here. The older women, they're very poor. People are super poor over there, for sure. But things have gotten better. But after the war, it was bad for everybody in the 80s and the 90s. It was awful for all of them. But those clinics are nice, and they're, you know, the government provides them. You have to get a permit and all that stuff. If you're ever having a bad day, remember this. So this is Courage, is my name for her. She's got her son, who's definitely got a problem. She doesn't look too healthy herself. She's got the crutch. She shows up, and there's always about 50 people waiting in line. She gets to go to the head of the line, and she goes past us, and every time she can say it, she says, "Thank the Americans for helping my baby." And you know why she's got a crutch? Because she has a withered leg. And she is like, it's amazing. So I saw her 3 different times, and I only cried 3 times. And I still cry thinking about her. So that is Courage. Lady Buddha on Monkey Mountain. So there's obviously all kinds of monkeys up there. And the Marines called it Monkey Mountain. And they basically did everything they could to get rid of all our stuff, including knocking down that fort and everything. But they named the mountain Monkey Mountain, which is amazing. And this Lady Buddha is looking all along China Beach, those pictures I showed you on the map. So she's looking throughout the whole China Beach. And that's a big tourist attraction now. That was a great idea doing that. So she's right about here, looking down at the whole beach. And you can see her from, the hotel. It's totally cool. So there's Monkey Mountain again. So there's a place up here we go to called Haivan Pass. And I started going up there at 3:30 in the morning on runs, because we were going to a top secret communications facility that the Army had. And there's bunkers there from World War II, and it's definitely a tight spot. So I always go there on the tours, and Hayward Paul, my friend, so we're up there. So there was a woman who talked to us in March. She comes up to me and she says, so she's local, and she definitely, so we're up here in the boondocks. So she looks at me, and she's probably like 25, 30, says, what's your name? Or what your name? It's like, who cares what my name is? I'm thinking, what the heck? So I said, I'm going to have some fun with this. My name, Trump. And that got her attention. So she looks at me, she said, you know Trump. but she knew who Trump was. And she is 9,000 miles from here. And she's in the boondocks. She's not in Saigon. It's like, and there's a store in Da Nang. The coffee in Vietnam's really great. There's a big, like a Starbucks kind of place. On the top of it is Trump Coffee, big sign.
No, really.
no, direct relation. They just put it up there, Trump Coffee. That's Ban Ha. I've been telling you guys about Ban Ha Mountain, which was a French retreat, I guess you could call it, in the 1920s. So for the officers, the French officers. Now you go up on a cable car. In the old days, they got carried up there, which was ridiculous. And they have all kinds of buildings up there, and they try and depict Europe. So that's when Sister Catherine was our guide that year. So that's the year I met Phum, so she was not my guide then. So Catherine took us up there. That's my other son-in-law, and there's Tok and Juan. You know how we got boxing? We had boxing in the old days. So Tok would be in the 70-pound class. She weighs less than 70 pounds in that picture. Juan? So 2010, and we went back, Hayward and I went back, this just recently in March. And that's the little girl, Juan. So she's come a long way, the little girl with the shoebox. And there's Tok and Phum and Tun and Hayward. So her mother is the umbrella. So we're going down in the cable car. And when I was in the fort, it was like a mythical place. Yeah, there's this mountain up here, down out there, and you can see it. And the VC are all over the place, and they hide in the forest, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're going down in the cable car, and we can see the monkeys frolicking on the treetops. It's the rainforest, and you can see through there, and she goes, many VC. Many VC. So she's pointing down there. And we knew the VC were down there. Then she takes the umbrella, puts it up. It's her fantasy rifle. Bang, bang, she goes. Me VC. So she was in the Viet Cong. As a teenager. She was probably 17 or 18. Yeah. And she's my friend. I include her on stuff. That was the first time she's been up on top of Ban Ha Mountain. So we're friends. So I got up and went over and I gave her a big hug. Because But it's like, you're too old, too young to be BC. So this is one hell of a nice place now, and there's tourists. It's tourism for the Vietnamese more than anybody, but now outsiders coming. That is fantastic. That's brand new. And I saw them building that when I was there in March of 18, and I got that on my on a website, or when I was looking at my computer, months later, where they finally finished it. You could see them doing it. So this is called the Golden Bridge, and I'll tell you how well known this is, or how fast it is. Somebody who lives in my building in Hinsdale, in our condominium building, said, yeah, we saw that bridge with the hand and the hang, and I'm like, that's impossible. That somebody who lives in our building saw this thing. So that is really a great tourist thing they did. And they got a big picture, or a big Buddha. I've been by that Buddha years ago. That was up there years ago. And so they've done some magnificent work on that complex.
You have a little less than 10 minutes.
Okay, good. I'm just finishing up too. Good. Thanks for telling me though. All right, there you go. Does anybody know what a hippie is? So when I went back in 07, I went up to Hue. So I showed you Hue, and that's the imperial capital, and that's where the Citadel is. So there's a bar called the DMZ Cafe. So it's for the demilitarized zone. And there's graffiti all over the wall. And that was one of the photos that I took. I said, I gotta take this picture. This is fantastic. And there's pool tables in there. And it's mostly European kids in their 20s, 25, 30 years old with their backpacks. And they stay in a $20 hotel room, 3 of them, and they split it. And so the DMZ Cafe, never trust a hippie. Let's see what else I want to say here. I gotta go back here 1 second. Okay, yeah, okay, good. All right, so I finally got out of there in September something. So we all know how big a hassle the airport is. I took a ship over there. We got flown out of there, and what was really cool is the night before we were going to leave, you've seen the air base. I've showed you that a few times. We slept in a tent. They had the officers in one big tent, about 100 yards from the runway. First thing in the morning, a Braniff, so a commercial airliner, Braniff Airlines has been out of business for a long time. Commercial airline lands, we get our meager gear, walk out, they roll up the stairway, and we get to walk up on a plane. And there's 3 flight attendants there. It's like, whoa, is this cool? And we did not care where we sat. The middle seats were fine. And we flew to Okinawa. We didn't fly home, flew to Okinawa. And we were there for 5 days. You can do anything you want, except you got to check in at 8:30 in the morning for roll call. So we flew back to Travis Air Force Base after the 5 days, and we got the welcome home, the welcome home thing was nothing. Nobody cared, but it was early. It was 1966, okay? And one of the questions you guys asked was, about going back to civilian life. Well, I went back. I was in the Marines for 4 years because of the Naval Academy, so I had a commitment. It's 5 years now. So I had orders, and I went out to California, Concord, California, which is not far from San Francisco, and it's 20 miles from Berkeley. And every day, demonstrators were out in front of us, in front of the gate. It was a naval weapons station. It was mostly civilians worked there. So I was the football coach and a security officer, and we had a top secret area. So you have to have a top secret clearance. And they had, which was really cool, and they didn't say anything about what they did or any of that stuff, except every once in a while when you're the duty officer, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you got to go out there, and there's these silos where they're working on these things. And they were working on air-to-air missiles. They were like really cool. They were like up on easels, and I got to go in there a few times, and it was like really interesting. So, and I also went to law school. I decided to go to law school when I was in San Francisco. because I was close to San Francisco. I had a regular job. I was married. Had the duty once in a while, but nothing unusual. So I went back to school again. So, you know, all the schooling they did with us. So I went to night school, and I did finish back here in Chicago. What else did I want to tell you here? Oh, all right. So that's right. We had an FBI agent at the gate too. So in Haight-Ashbury, I definitely walked through Haight-Ashbury. There were a bunch of dirty guys on drugs. So 1973, I think it was, the prisoners were released from the Hanoi Hilton Holo prison. That is a real guillotine, and that gets your attention when you walk out in there. And it's the French used it on the Vietnamese. It had nothing to do with us, because if they did something like that to us, I'm sure we would have destroyed Hanoi. But and that's not far from that fancy Metropole hotel I told you about. And there's 3 baskets here, and there's 3 women's heads in the basket. 1 woman in each basket. Pretty brutal. Monkey Mountain. So they actually put that up there. That had to be a tribute to us, really, because that was not there in the old days. And that's some kind of a, high-tech thing, I guess, up there. So the reunions. So Alpha 111 was the artillery battery. Where is this? There's Heike, this guy here. There's Kobayashi, and a bunch of other guys. One of the questions was, we have friends. Most of the Marines were friends. The officers, we got moved around, and you weren't supposed to be friends with the troops. So I was friends with Hayward, you know, and a few other guys. I saw guys from Annapolis a lot. The pay officer was one of the cool jobs we had. You'd go back, get the money for everybody, and bring it around, and you'd see guys from Annapolis that way. That's at one of our reunions, the things they carried. These are the C ration cans. It's a carbine, that's a landmine. So I'm doing this kind of fast. There's my buddy Foom. So they train everybody over there in case they're always ready to fight China. And that's true. That's my radio man, the guy who carried the 26 pounds. So that's in Washington, D.C., obviously. And one of the main guys is watching over us there. We had a 50th reunion for that attack on our position on 18 April. So we had a minister, and we did a service, and that's the Vietnam Wall for you guys that haven't seen that. It's worth going to, the Vietnam Wall. It's back in Angkor Wat with the boys. So you'll notice you feed the elephants before you ride them. And then they're your friends. And the elephant's smiling, and the boys are smiling. Yeah, that's me with my 2 friends. Peace be with you. So this was fun. Thanks a lot. Hope you guys learned something. Okay.